So I'm getting kind of excited. I get it to the boat. I put it in the net. I mean, I'm telling you, this fish probably had a 36, 38 inch girth.
Welcome to the Eternal Fishing Podcast. This is the podcast where a passion for fishing meets timeless biblical principles. Here we're casting our lines not just into the waters, but also into the very words of God. In this episode, I interview with Chip Bragg, who is a charter fishing captain on Lake Murray in South Carolina. And there he's taking clients out, putting them on stripers year-round, all 12 months of the year. And he also has a passion for catching giant blue catfish. And so he just shares amazing tips. I mean, just really practical tips on how to get out on the water and catch stripers. And then also he has challenged me to try something new by dragging for catfish. That's just something that's new to me, but not new for many of you listening, I'm sure. But I hope that you've learned a lot of great knowledge from this call. I know I did, and I'm sure that it will be beneficial for you. Before we jump into that call, I'm going to read for us a quote by the one, the only, the historical novelist Mark Twain, who said this: "The catfish is a plenty good enough fish for anyone." I know that catfish gets a lot of negative rap sometimes. You know, they're a bottom feeder, they're a slime sucker, or whatever you want to call it. But I tell you what, they're a lot of fun to catch, and they're great to eat. And so don't be hating on the catfish. I think there's a lot of good to come out of catfishing. All right, the Bible verse here is John chapter 21, verse 6. Just a little bit of context here is that Jesus has gone to the cross. His disciples have fled because they're afraid. They don't want to be crucified either. And so they flee, they leave him, and he has resurrected from the dead. His disciples doing what you and I might do, they went back out fishing. They returned back to their old trades, their old jobs. So they're out there fishing, not having any luck. Who can relate? I think all of us. And so they're out there fishing. They're not catching anything. And Jesus says to them, and they don't recognize him for who he is. They don't even know this is Jesus. They just think it's someone on the side of the lake calling out to them. And he said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. We're going to dive more into that passage, but before then, let's jump ahead into this call with Chip and learn all about striper fishing and catching giant blue catfish on Lake Murray.
Hey, Chip, how's it going so far today?
Doing good. Had a nice cold day today. I actually got to take the day off from the lake today. It was kind of enjoyable.
Oh, nice. So you had the day off, weren't not on the water?
Yeah, it was. We had a starting temp of about 16, 17 degrees here this morning. We had a little cold front come in, and I don't mind fishing it. I mean, I'll fish at anything, but sometimes it's tough to get clients out there when it's nice and cold, and that's where a lot of big fish bite. But it's still, they like the comfort of them warm houses versus that cold lake.
I understand. I'm down here in Charleston, not too far from Lake Murray, and it's cold here as well. In fact, I went out to my boat this morning, parked here in the driveway, and knocked some ice off of it. And so I'm not necessarily a fan of the cold myself, but hey, like you said, sometimes you just got to go and try, right? And it sounds like, from what I've heard, sometimes you can catch some of the bigger ones in the cold weather.
Oh yeah. That's some of whether it be I'm kind of mainly a striper guide, but I also do some catfishing too. And those are some of my favorite days to be on the waters when no one else wants to be there. You get a low pressure coming in, which is usually some pretty snotty weather. Whether it be wind and rain and a lot of cloud cover. Those can be some very, very great days to be on the water.
Yeah. Awesome. So you guide out of Lake Murray, South Carolina, and any other lakes or bodies of water, or are you primarily there?
I'm primarily on Murray. I run about probably 95% of my trips on Murray. I have a select customer base that they've been fishing with me probably for the last, 7, 8 years. Some of these guys, I guess I've been guiding now for about 9.
Okay.
But some of these guys have been with me since day one, and they're booking 2 and 3, 4, 5 trips a year with me. So some of those guys, you kind of reserve, some special trips for them.
Of course.
They've hung around forever. So sometimes I'll take them over to Lake Russell, which is over on the, western part of the state, over in Georgia, South Carolina line. It's actually managed as South Carolina's trophy fishery, so the limits are different. A lot of catch and release over there. A lot of your larger fish are protected. The last 2 state records have come out of Murray. I'm sorry, have come out of Russell.
Yeah.
So it's managed differently. So we go over there. I do a handful of trips over there a year, but it's not something I advertise or just,
Yeah.
take everybody over there.
Have you found the fishing strategy or techniques to be the same between Lake Murray and Lake Russell, or have you found there to be differences?
They fish very, very different.
Okay.
Really, the whole Savannah chain. You got Clarks Hill, Russell, and Hartwell. They fish completely different than Murray. Murray is I don't know. There's a lot of people that don't like fishing Murray. It can be tough at times. But generally, our fish, whether it be cats or stripers or anything else, they relate. They run with the bait, but they also relate to points and ditches and humps, so forth. And it seems like when you go over there to the Savannah chain, there's so much standing timber in those lakes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's you get up in like 80 foot of water and you got trees coming up that are 20 foot under the boat. Those 60 and 70 foot tall boat, and those fish just tend to live in the trees. It doesn't matter if it's on a flat or a point or whatever. They want to be in the trees. And Murray doesn't have that type of tree structure or that type of standing timber in it. So they fish completely different though.
Okay. Well, how did you end up focusing 95% of your trips on Lake Murray?
So I'm 40. I guess what am I now? I'm 43. I moved to South Carolina when I was between 8 and 9, and we actually moved down to the Summerville area, and then slowly worked our way up here. And my parents were just following work.
Mm-hmm.
And we settled in the Gilbert area, which is just on the south side of Lake Murray, and we were just looking for a good time on the lake, like anybody else would. And my father, we started fishing it. Didn't know anything about it, and we swore for years and years there wasn't any fish in this lake. But we were fishing it just completely wrong. But so basically, I've just been in this area forever. I've been fishing this lake for, like I said, probably since I was about 12, 13. So we're coming up on about 30 years of being on this lake.
Man.
And so this is my home. That's what I consider my home, and this is where I want to be and where I want to fish at.
Oh, that's awesome. One of my earliest memories of ever fishing was on Lake Murray over by Dreher Island. That's where my grandparents lived. And my earliest memories ever fishing was with a cane pole, catching the mayfly out of the spider web on Granddad's dock and dropping it down and catching brim doing that. And so Lake Murray is a special place for me because it's where I was introduced to fishing from my grandfather. And so anyhow, we were actually, my wife and I and the family, we got together and rented a house on Lake Murray over Thanksgiving. And so we were out there riding around in the Tri-Tune, and I caught some bass on a crankbait, believe it or not. And so had a good time, and we caught some catfish off the dock. So it was a good time. But anyhow, Lake Murray is a special place for me as well, and it sounds like you've got quite the knowledge of the lake. So you mentioned something that stood out to me because I can definitely relate to this. When you said fishing it all wrong and thinking there was no fish in the lake, I think a lot of people, I don't know, maybe if they're like me at least, kind of feel like that a lot of times. Could you help us understand when you say you were fishing it wrong? What were you doing that was wrong?
So I'll tell you just and of course, hopefully people don't hate me for this, but I'm not originally from here. Obviously, I said I moved here when I was between 8 and 9, but I actually moved from Ohio.
Sure, yeah.
You all seen the bumper stickers that say "Go back to Ohio."
Oh,
So
come on.
I'm one of the transplants, but I've been here long enough that people have finally accepted me. But
Of course.
so we were just fishing the lake wrong. We fished it the lake we fished where we come from up in Ohio. We fished the banks. We were mainly mainly panfish fishermen, looking for those bluegill, and up there everything was bluegill. We go down here and everything's called brim.
Yeah, yeah.
So we didn't even know what people were fishing for, but we were just fishing differently, and literally by mistake, my mother was fishing with us, and she never fished. She just put a line in the water. But me and my dad casting up on the bank, throwing our little floats and crickets up in there, and the only thing we ever caught were like these little 4-inch brim, and I'm just like, man, there's no fish in this lake. And literally, she started catching these like big, like pound and a half bluegill and a shell cracker, and I'm just like, this is like all wrong. But what she was doing is she was throwing out on the deep side. So I know this is getting way off the line, but that's what kind of opened the eyes that not all lakes are the same. I mean, we're talking 30 some years ago.
Yeah.
That you have to fish things differently. And honestly, even today, I'm still learning that you have to fish different lakes different ways, as we talked before with like between Clarks Hill, Russell, and Murray here. But just by seeing the water depth difference, we were able to start changing our mindset, and we started fishing the lake differently. And before you knew it, man, we were catching fish all the time, and it was one of our favorite places that we've ever fished, and to this day, it is one of my favorite places to fish.
Go mom for trying something new. That's awesome.
I guess you can call it
that. Well, it was a welcomed accident for sure.
That's right.
Awesome. So you are taking clients out. You said you've been guiding 9 years now, I think is what you said. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just thinking 9 years, and have you on Lake Murray? So have you primarily been going after stripers, or is that your go-to fish year round, or do you vary your target species throughout the year? What's your strategy there?
Yeah, so I've been guiding about 8-9 years. Most of that time was part-time. I'm actually now a full-time guide as of March of 23.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, it's been people ask me all the time, what do you do? And I was like, this is it. This is my only source of income is on this boat. Like I said, since March of 23, and it's been a blessing. I've poured my heart and soul into this, and it's paid off dividends. It's great. I work more now than I've ever worked in my life, which is a good thing. I'm staying busy, but that's part of, if you're not out there working and showing people a good time, eventually your clients stop coming.
Yeah.
And if they stop coming, then you don't have any work. So basically I'm a full-time guide, 12 months a year. I fish striper 12 months a year. I basically, we talked about how, just starting fishing the lake, I was just fishing for brim and this and that. And I used to go fishing, and I didn't know what I wanted to fish for. I literally took like 40 rods on the boat. If I wanted to catfish, or if I wanted to striper fish, crappie fish, or what.
That is me all day long.
So
sorry, go
basically, ahead. I sat down one day. I was looking in the garage, and I looked at all this fishing stuff all over the walls, and I said, I need to pick one. And I picked striper, and I picked the striper just because of basically I love that initial run, that hard fight. They're the hard. I pound for pound in the lake, I think they're the hardest fighting fish. I mean, I've caught cats 50, 60, 70 pounds in the lake before, and they don't hold the candle to say a 10, 15, 20 pound striper. I love that long run. Drag screaming. It's very active. So that's why I picked the stripers. But over the years, I still fall back into some roots. I still love to, come April, May, when shellcracker and bluegill are bedding, I love going out there and taking people out and catching those.
Yeah.
When the pre-spawn crappie in March, I love to long line troll for them.
Mm.
And then in the cooler months, we started touching on the cats. The cats usually run from about mid-October through February. Those cold months, they get down there in those channels, on the edges of the channels, and they sit there and they just feed. But there's something to be said. Like I said, I love the long runs of the striper, but at the same time, you catch you a 40, 50, 60-pound cat who just slams a rod, and it's just a tug of war getting them off the bottom. There's something to be said. I love that as well.
Absolutely. Oh man. Yeah, so 12 months a year, stripers, and you had to pick the stripers because of that initial run that they give you. Man, so the strip and drag and all of that. That reminds me of a time when I had something grab one of my lines. It wasn't on Lake Murray. It was on the Carr Reservoir on the North Carolina-Virginia border. And it took every bit of line off my reel and kept on going. And I don't know what it was, but it was either a ginormous catfish or maybe a big striper. But that, when they pull, it's something else.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it very well could have been either of those. I have a buddy who fishes Carr up there, and they fish very similar to Murray. Murray fishes very, very similar to Carr up there.
Really? Okay. Gotcha. So I wanted to ask you about striper fishing, but also catfishing. And so one of the questions I have about stripers is 12 months out of the year. I mean, you mentioned right now it's very cold, but we also know here in South Carolina it gets very hot. How does your strategy change based on the weather?
So, the stripers are very water temperature dependent. Their actions are dictated by the water temperature. Typically, I always tell people the magic number that starts causing fish to do different things as far as the striper goes is about that 72 to 75 degrees. So, if it's coming out of the spring, going into the summer, the water starts hitting that 72, 75. These fish start going deeper. They have to have that cool water to live. It's the same way in the salt water. They migrate up and down the coast, actually following water temp.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily this or that, but it's all about following the water temp that they want to be in, which typically is in that low to mid 60s. That's when the stripers are really the most active. But at the same time, you have to pay attention to, is it a falling to 60s or is it a rising to 60s? So if, let's say you're coming down the summertime and the fish have been extremely deep and the water temp is falling and it gets into the 60s, they're not as active as, say, when the water's been in the 40s and it's coming up to 60s, which would be, your winter to spring movement. Everything gets real active in the spring. But so basically, I let the water temperature dictate what I'm going to do. Summertime, deep water, water's hot. We're going to be anchored or spot locked, sitting still, fishing. Where these fish like to hang out in the summertime, which is typically on the humps or the long underwater points. Sometimes they'll be in the ditches, but they'll typically relate to something on the bottom. Lake Murray is a man-made lake. A lot of that was farmland, and we found over the years that there's just certain spots that the stripers like to congregate on. And sometimes I always wonder, man, is it a house foundation down there? Is it an old spring? It's something that they relate to on certain points because they notoriously come back to those same spots year after year after year. But we like to catch those deep water fish. They're sitting down in that deep cold water in the summertime. Now, as the fall progresses, they start getting a little bit more active. They start coming back up to the surface. Late August and through September, we have a lot of schooling that goes on, and that's this fish that's basically been pushed down deep all summer long. The water temp's starting to fall, and they can finally come up and get on the surface. A striped bass tends to want to live in the upper third water column. So, you take whatever water depth you got, divide it by 3, and they want to be in that top third. So, that's when they get trapped down deep, they're just waiting to come up, and they can start feeding again. And then as the fall and the winter goes on, these fish really start foraging just crazy amounts. But they won't sit still. So we tend to start slow trolling for them. We're using planer boards and free lines, moving like 0.7 to 0.9 miles an hour, usually with live baits. And we'll be fishing anywhere from, we might fish 40 foot of water. We might fish 4 inches of water or 4 foot of water.
Wow.
The biggest fish I've ever caught in this lake, as far as a striper goes, was 34 pounds. Caught it back in 2018. That fish came out of less than 5 foot of water.
Man.
On a cold March morning, it ate about a 12-inch live herring. I don't know if you're familiar with coming into Charleston. About 2 weeks after Valentine's Day, the Ocean Run River herring come in through Charleston. They go up to the Santee Lakes to spawn.
Yeah.
And we'll actually go down there and catch those bluebacks, those Ocean Run bluebacks, and then bring them back up to the lake and fish them live.
Okay. Yeah.
Which it can get kind of exciting. You got a pound and a half live bait out there running and jumping
Right.
around, and there's a fish following it and chasing the whole time, and your heart just starts beating out of your chest, and then next thing you know, he grabs him, and then it's on. But it's good times. But yeah, so I mean, just the water temp dictates how we're fishing for them, and then as we're coming out of the fall, going into the spring, these fish are still on the move. And then eventually we get back into the summertime, and it completes full circle. And year after year, we do the same thing. These fish are creatures of habit, and we just keep following them around in circles.
All right.
Yeah.
So you have both the sitting still on points, it sounds like, deep channels where it's the colder water, maybe some structure or something that's attracting them there. And then you also have the planer boards where you're trolling. How many planer boards are you trolling at one time?
A standard guide trip, as long as there's been days where it's just been crazy and you can't put a bunch of them out because as soon as you get lines out, they're taking off. But, a typical spread is about 10 rods. We'll run about 3 planer boards on each side, and then we'll run a couple free lines off the back corner of the boat, and then also a couple down rods.
Okay.
When you're trying to run a spread like that in the wintertime, again, these fish are moving so much. You want to cover ground left and right, but you also want to cover the water column. You'll have some fish that want to be on the surface, some fish that want to be down. So what we do with the planer boards, those typically cover our surface baits, and then our free lines, we'll put like a little 1/4 ounce weights on them. It'll get down there around that 6 to 8, maybe 10 foot deep, and then we'll put some 2-ounce leads on our down rods, and we'll run them about, we might run them 10, 20, we might run them 30 foot deep, just depending on the water depth. So you're wanting to cover left and right, and you also want to cover the water column up and down.
So you're not using downriggers then on your down rods?
No, sir.
Okay.
Like what we consider a down rod. Yeah, it's just a standard medium light rod with a 2-ounce weight on it. That we just put it straight down beside the boat. Even as we move, there's a little bit of blowback. So if I put it down 25, that bait may be running at 20 or something like that. Something very similar.
So are you doing almost like a Carolina rig to a sinker, and then a leader after that?
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly. Our Carolina rig is basically the number one rig that we use. So even on my free lines, I'm running a Carolina rig with a 1/4 ounce weight. My down rods are a Carolina rig with a 2-ounce. My planer boards are actually a Carolina rig with no weight. So it's basically just a swivel connection with a bead on top with no weight. But you have to have the bead there so that the planer board stops above the swivel and doesn't continue on to the hook, and then the fish can actually use the planer board to pry itself off.
Right. Okay. And so are you, for your main line, are you doing braid or monofilament or?
I'm a straight mono guy.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of braid in freshwater. Now I use some braid in saltwater. I fish a lot in Alaska. That's a whole other topic there, but fish a lot in Alaska. I also fish offshore a good bit. I do some inshore fishing, and I love braid in the salt. I don't know. I can't tell you why I like it inshore, but offshore I'm usually fishing deep, and you want to feel every little bump, and that braid makes with no stretching is very
Yeah. Yeah.
good for that. But as far as freshwater goes, the braid, I think it just gets in the way. I don't like the way it runs to the water. You know how braid tangles with twists, and simple twist can turn into a knot in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I try to stay away from the braid in the freshwater. So I'd rather go up in line size than try and use braid.
Okay.
If some people say, "Oh, some people like say, "Oh, they like a big line for certain things," and I'd rather just use my mono.
Okay. So are you running the same pound monofilament from your main line even all the way through to your leader as well?
Yeah, so I was about ready to continue on with that, and so I do run a fluoro leader
Okay.
on all my stuff. I dropped down the size of my leader, so I'll run a 20-pound main line on everything, whether it's a down rod or a free line or a planer board. Everything's 20-pound mono, and then I run a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader. I use this Stigar, I think it's InvisX. Yeah, Cielo box. It's InvisX. And then I run the cheap Berkeley Big Game 20-pound.
Oh
I
yeah.
go through so much of it. And I tell people all the time, it's probably the best, cheapest line out there. I've literally used it since day one of striper fishing. I remember even as with my dad, we were sitting there spooling up 6500s back in the day, and we would use some Berkeley Big Game because that's
Yeah.
what Walmart sold, so that's what we bought.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I love some Berkeley Big Game. Lots of years with that one. So awesome. Gotcha. And on that main line, that Berkeley Big Game, have you found a difference in color, like whether it's clear or that was it like moss green or something like that?
Well, I always tell people moss green. I've been using moss green since I knew what a striper was, and that was, I don't know. My dad picked that color out long time ago. We were sitting there looking, and back then it was basically you had clear and moss and moss green. I mean, now you got solar collector and oranges and
Yeah.
reds and all this other stuff, but.
Yeah.
But I've been a moss green user for, again, since I knew what a striper was. And I don't think it really matters.
Okay.
So there was a time there when I used to tournament fish a lot. I'd used a lot of high vis stuff. I used a lot of high vis. Like I said, solar collector was Berkeley Big Game's bright one. It's almost like a bright neon green. I used it for a long time too, and I never see any difference. I always tell
Okay.
people stripers are not line shy by any means.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And then what kind of hook are you using for your? It sounds like you're really primarily running live bait, if I'm hearing you correctly. But
Yes.
okay. And what kind of hook are you using for that?
So we typically, well, we don't typically, we always use an owner Mutu light wire. There's two types you can have, and that's a circle hook. Um, the Mutu comes in two different versions. It comes with a tournament edition and just a regular edition. The tournament is in line. I don't care to use that one. I actually use just the regular one, so it's a little bit offset. But the Mutu is a light wire hook. Have I straightened it out a few times? Yes. I had some clients tighten some drags, even though I tell them not to. Um, we've had a few of them straightened out before. We've had some bent that look like a corkscrew. It's a really light wire hook, but we use a 1/0 typically for our everyday fishing. I do carry 4/0 and 7/0. That's for if I'm pulling out the big river herring, or sometimes we'll use some trout if we're on a lake that allows us to use trout. Um, but also, in the springtime, I like to fish a lot of bigger baits. We might fish some 10, 12-inch gizzard shad. And then those baits are going to get 4/0 or 7/0, depending on what size they are. But typically, my everyday hook is a 1/0 owner Mutu light wire circle.
Awesome. Awesome. And then how much of a leader are you given between say the ounce, the quarter ounce or 2 ounce, or even the planer?
So typically we just, I'm not, some people get real scientific about this stuff, and I literally just kind of pull it out and say, yay, this much. But typically about 3 to 4 feet. You know,
Okay.
4 feet's getting kind of long, but I like that 3.5 foot range.
Gotcha. Cool. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for the setup there. That's very helpful to know. So, man, I can't imagine running 10 rods at one time. I think the most I've done is probably 6. I think at one time. But how do you have help with you when you run these charters, or are you the only guy on the boat running, making sure the rods aren't getting tangled up?
So people always ask, they're like, how do you do that and not tangle up? Typically, honestly, it's a very, very common spread. You can come up from the lake, and there's people that run 12 and 14. It's just a good number for me. I think you don't want to get don't get carried away with it. But I always tell people I can actually run more by myself than I can with my customers on.
Sure.
Because you get customers on the boat, they're almost in the way.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that in a bad way, but
no, it's
they're
true.
all there. So you got to keep the number of rods down. But and people worry about tangles all the time. But the way we kind of set these boats up, a fish gets on, he kind of takes off and runs to the back of the boat, and really they just kind of they come straight into the back of the boat. You don't have to worry about tangles. Do they happen? Absolutely. All it takes is one crazy fish who wants to decide he wants to run all over the place.
Yep.
I've actually had a fish come in and eat a bait behind a planer board on the port side. He run across, and you're fighting him. He gets all the way over to the starboard side, then another board takes off, and it turns out it was the same fish, and he ate both baits. And literally he has 2 hooks in his mouth. It's not like he got snagged or something like that. These stripers, man, when they get to feeding, they don't care. They just eat.
That's fun.
There's actually a first for me this past spring. Actually, it was in June. We were out fishing. I had a charter, and we were on this. Basically, it happens almost every June, not always, but it's a free line bite. We get out there over like 180 to 100 foot of water, and we just kind of cast free lines out around the boat, and these fish will come up and start schooling. And I had a fish, first time it's ever happened to me. The rod, I throw it out, the rod goes immediately, doubles over, and then it pops back up. And I'm like, oh, he got off, and it immediately, doubles back over again. Oh, he's on. So I'm telling people to pick him up, reel it in. They're reeling it in. And I see it, and I'm thinking, here's my chance. You see all these videos of people getting the free net of fish. There's always another fish following another fish in, and there's some guy there with a GoPro, and he gets the guy dipping both fish, and everybody wants to do that. So here I is, this fish is coming in, and I see the other fish behind it. I'm thinking, here's my chance. I'm actually going to get to do this. Of course, I didn't have any type of camera or anything on at the time. But it didn't matter. I was going to do it. So I dipped both fish.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, I just finally did it. So I put them in the boat, and I dumped them out of the net, and I realized, I said, something's not right. And both fish were on the line. And I'm just like, that physically can't happen. So I immediately get my phone out, and I start taking a video. And that reel went crazy on Facebook with it. But so what had happened is these fish were feeding so fast that this fish that came in opened its mouth and ate the herring, but that herring actually went out its gill plate. And when instead of going down its throat, it went out the gill plate. And there's another fish who ate the herring. So basically, my customer's reeling in these 2 fish. One fish has a line through its mouth and out its gill, and then the other fish is hooked. So it's almost like the old school stringers back in the day. You hook one fish to it, then just slide them on. That's what it was, all the way to the boat. And I was just like, I've never seen it on anybody's videos. And it's just something you can't really make up. But I mean,
that is
I had 4 people in the boat that got to see it. It's probably one of my most memorable events that's ever happened on a boat that I talk about.
Wow.
Being able to witness that was pretty cool.
It's like, I wonder if that's even ever happened before, like anywhere. That is what a neat story.
Yeah. It's actually, if you ever had a chance to, I have the video sitting there on my Facebook page. It's a great little video because I'm in just as much shock as anybody, but
yeah,
it was good stuff.
My goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, just a couple more questions here on stripers, and then I want to jump into some catfish. So, when you mentioned you're sitting on points, about how deep are you sitting generally, and how far down are you dropping your bait?
So, again, we're going to run back to water temperature dependent. The temperature is going to dictate where I'm at on that point. Let's say if it's in the springtime or even the wintertime, I may be up there at the base of the point, up there next to the land, especially if it has riprap, on that point, and it's in the springtime. There's going to be herring on that riprap spawning. The herring use the riprap at rocky areas, rocky bottoms to spawn on. So if it's in the springtime and the water temp is say, 55 to 65 or 68, I'm probably going to be up here in 5 to 15, maybe 20 feet of water, and I'm going to be fishing the surface. Now, if it's in the summertime, again, the fish are going deep because they're looking for that cool water.
Mm-hmm.
I may be sitting out there in 50, 60, 70, all the way up to 100 feet on the point. I know it sounds crazy deep, but, the deepest striper I've ever caught in this lake was 120 foot deep on the bottom.
You caught him off of
I don't know what
120 down?
120 foot down on the bottom.
Goodness. Wow.
They will go deep as long as they have enough oxygen down. And typically that happens early summer. Our water quality kind of goes down considerably about the last week of July. But June and July, sometimes you can catch some of those deep fish down there, and they're just down there swimming, looking for cool water. The first time I ever caught one below 80 or 90 feet, I didn't think, my depth finder was showing fish down there. I was like, there's no way those fish are down there.
Yeah.
But you drop a bait down there and there they are.
Holy.
I have a place in the summer that I regularly fish, and the bottom of it's about 90 foot, and I fish about 85 to 87 foot deep in 90 foot of water.
Man,
I don't like to do it too much because a lot of times you pull up some really, really nice fish. I know that sounds weird, but my customers enjoy what I do for them, but they also know summertime we kill a lot of fish.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, that 18 to 22 inch fish, it puts up a great fight. It eats very well. There's no reason to go out and try to kill, a limit full of 10 pounders, or 8 to 12 pounders.
Yeah.
Be concerned about it. Come catch those in the fall, winter, and spring when we can take some pictures of them and throw them back.
Yeah.
Or keep a couple. I'm not sitting there trying to say that I don't keep fish, because we keep a lot of fish, but we also release a lot of fish too.
Right.
Try to ride the fence on that one the best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, one of the things I learned about striper fishing, at least on Car Lake, was you got, at least in the heat of the summer, you got to know where the thermocline is. And do you ever use the thermocline as a guide for where you're dropping your baits?
Typically, I like to fish typically below the thermocline. Some people like to fish above it. The fish that are below the thermocline, they're a little bit more susceptible to fish kills, what we call it a striper squeeze. So once that thermocline establishes, whatever oxygen is below that thermocline, that's all they have until the thermocline dissipates, which is usually when the lake turns over in November.
Right.
But if you're fishing below the thermocline, those fish are usually pretty active.
Okay.
There's also not a lot of bait down there. Most of your bait is above the thermocline. At least on our lake it is. So when you find those fish below the thermocline, a lot of times it's like catching fish in a barrel. You find them all all grouped up together on a point. You drop a live herring down there, and there's not much for them to eat down there, and they haven't eaten in a couple of weeks. It's usually game on.
Okay.
But typically I like to fish below the thermoclines.
Okay.
In the summertime.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. Well, I am excited to talk about catfishing. One of my favorite things to do, at least what I think I've spent the most time doing, is catfishing myself. And that's mostly on Car Lake there, Car Reservoir, going after the blue cats. But I would love to know, how do you do that? How do you go after the cats? What is your strategy? I just want to hear, and learn from you. How do you do it?
So as far as my catfish trips, or when I target the cats, even with just me fishing by myself, I typically do it, about mid-October through February. I like to do it in the cold months. This is when the fish are really, really feeding up. They're getting ready to start. They're basically feeding up for their spawn in the spring. But this is the time that they're also the easiest to target for me. Um, I've never really messed with them much in the spring and the summer. I do know a lot of places that they frequent because I see them on the grass, but they're not easily targetable because sometimes they'll suspend in the summertime. And then in the springtime they're in their spawn, and there's just a lot of things that stack up against you during that time frame.
Okay.
Not to mention, I'm a catch and release guy when it comes to these big blues. So I mean, I like to catch them in a time I'm not putting a lot of stress on these fish, which typically is in the fall and winter months. I fish a little bit different than a lot of people. There's a lot of guys who like to drift. They use the wind, the drift socks and the drift paddles now. Some guys like to anchor, they'll anchor, or some guys like to spot lock. That's not me. I like to have control of my boat. So I'm always I'm always what they call dragging. I'm always dragging. Whether it's with the wind, um, I typically don't go with the wind. I'm sorry. It's usually against the wind. I like to have my nose in the wind, and I like the boat. That way, I have control of my boat. If I see a little contour that just looks different, I want to make sure my boat goes over top of that, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be confined by where the wind is going to take me. So that's why I don't do a lot of drifting. I do a lot of dragging. Even though they're the same thing, it's just that I have control where I go versus the wind having control where I go. But I do a lot of dragging. I use anywhere from 2-ounce drifting weights to 4-ounce drifting weights. I use the excuse me, your stereotypical Santee rig. You got your big 8 to 10 aught hook. Your peg float about 4 to 6 inches above your hook. Then you got your swivel connection, and then you have some sort of sliding weight. Some people like to have their weight fixed right there at that swivel connection. I do not. I like mine to be slidable. Above, it slides on my main line. I tried to run it fixed for years, and I just kept getting hung up. I mean, it
Okay.
just stayed hung up, and I could not get it undone. And then I switched over to letting the weight slide, and it has been so much better. I bet you I've only lost, I don't know, 5 to 7 rigs in the last year or two since I went to a sliding rig. I still get hung. I always tell people, if you're not getting hung up some, you're not fishing in the right areas. Especially for these big cats. They do like to be around those stumps and those laydowns and those underwater brush piles. I mean, they're going to hang around those where they're feeding on stuff. So typically I like to drag, and I drag at, it's water temperature again dependent. This whole freshwater fishery is all about water temp. I mean, it's the start and finish of each season. But as long as the water temp is, the way it is now, it's 50. You tell me it's above 50 degrees. I like to be in that point 0.5 to point 0.6, sometimes 0.7 miles an hour when I'm dragging. As the water falls into the 40s, I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to do that 0.3, 0.4 miles an hour. As that water temperature cools off, these fish get just a little bit more sluggish. They've had full bellies for a month. The last month or two, they've been gorging themselves. So they're going to be a little bit slower, not necessarily wanting to chase a bait. When the water temp's a little bit warmer, they will chase. I've had fish, when I'm making my baits up, I usually cut the tails off and I throw them in the water. I'm not a tail user. I like to use the head and the guts. Basically, the head down to the gut pocket is the piece that I use. But I've had fish, literally, I cut the baits up, I'm tossing the tails in the water, and then 30 minutes later, I catch a fish. and he's literally puked up the tail in my boat that I threw out 30 minutes ago.
No kidding, man.
So yes, so that fish, I know that fish followed me for 30 minutes.
Wow.
I know that sounds like some crazy story, but I'm telling you, when you stay on the water long enough, or as long as I do, you see all kinds of stuff, man. It's just the stuff that I still get baffled even today. But yeah, so that's the general, you know, story. No, I'm sorry. It's just that's the general consistency of how I fish. Is I drag, and I
Okay.
drag Santee rigs. I do mainly use cut bait. I like gizzard shad and I like perch. Those are my two main baits. I'm not a bluegill or a brim user. I know some people who
Okay.
do use them, but Murray just doesn't seem to produce a whole lot. At least the big blues. I know some people may will probably disagree with me. Say, "Oh, I caught my biggest one." You know, that's great for you. Um,
Yeah.
but it's never produced much for me. My biggest cat on Murray, which actually, believe it or not, I actually just caught this past, what is today? Today's Monday. So Tuesday, this last Tuesday, so about 6 days ago, I caught my PB on Murray. It was 72, big blue.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm looking at the picture right now
I,
on Facebook. That is awesome. Wow, that's a big boy.
that's and I tell you what, that fish, I did not know it was that big. When it went off, I was like, I picked the rod up. I was fishing by myself. I actually left the house that morning. I told my wife, I said, I'm going to get a big one today. And I left the house going to go catch a big catfish. I'm thinking big, 40 to 50 pounds is what I
Yeah,
was looking for. I never expected a new PB at 72.
man.
But when the fish took off, I was just, I picked the rod up and I said, oh, this is a good one. This one might be about, I'm telling not to myself, of course. And I'm like, this one might be about a 30. And then I keep my cat drags kind of tight, just because usually if you get hung up while you're dragging, if you get them too loose, then they won't pop loose. So
Right, right.
I keep a pretty tight drag, and all of a sudden it starts taking a bunch of line. I'm like, this fish is bigger than what I think it's going to be. And then we get the fish stopped. He starts coming to the boat, and he finally surfaces. And I look back there, and I was like, that fish is 40 to 50 pounds, I think. And again, you can't really tell until you get him up by the boat. And so I'm getting kind of excited. I get it to the boat, and I put it in the net, and I still have not seen the belly of this cat. I'm just seeing the top of it, and the cat's about 40 inches or so long. I'm guessing. I never measured it, but I put it in the net, and I go to lift the net up, and I'm like, this fish is way over 50 pounds. I buy 50-pound bags of dog food and corn all the time. I was like, this fish is over 50 pounds. And then I put it in the boat. When I put it in the boat, she rolled over on her side, and I seen the belly, and I was like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I'm telling you, this fish probably had a 36, 38 inch girth. It's just amazingly fat fish. And then, like I said, I weighed it and ended up being 72. But yeah, that's kind of ran rampant there on a fish story. But
I love it. What was the bait? What was the bait that you caught her on?
So I was using I was using gizzard shad.
Gizzard shad. Okay.
Yeah, it was a cut gizzard shad, and I'd had a couple good bites that morning. One was on a live bait, and that's something else that I like to do. That a lot of people that I've talked to a lot of cat guys, and you'll find one every now and then that runs a live bait. And typically I like to run a live perch. I don't like some people have a cooler full of their cut bait that they cut up and they just put pieces on the hook. So all of my bait that I use, even when I'm catfishing, I take it out of my live well. It's live when I cut it.
Okay.
So I keep a lot of live perch in the boat. And it's been, I don't know, a couple years ago, I just decided, I'm going to put a live one on there. And that first day I put a live perch on there, I caught a 52-pound flathead on it. And to this day, I do not go fishing for cats unless I'm going to put a live bait out. Every fish that I have caught on a live bait while dragging has been over 40 pounds. The live bait doesn't get hit a lot, but when it does, it's usually a really, really good one. So that's something to think about. If you got your listeners out there listening, and if y'all have never drug a live bait while catfishing, that's something to think about. I love doing it because usually it's a very, very active big cat that'll eat a live bait while dragging.
So,
The rest of the time, I'm cutting my baits up though.
are you running? How many rods are you dragging at one time?
So typically, I like to only do five.
Five.
I do
Okay.
one, yeah, one out the middle, two one off each corner, then I run one planer board off each side. Occasionally, if there's zero wind, it's kind of flat. I'll run two more rods. I'll run seven.
Okay.
But I don't get all crazy. I see some of these cat guys that, they're running two and three planer boards off each side, just like the striper guys do, but they're doing it with cats. And that's just an extremely lot of line to be out. A lot of times you're running 100+ feet of line out behind these planer boards. So make sure you stay in contact with the bottom. And then you may have another 100 feet of line out to the planer board from the rod. Next thing you know, you got 250 feet of line out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a lot. That's a lot of line out the water.
Yes.
You break off, and next thing you know, you're re-spooling in the boat because you ain't got no line on your reel.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I just don't get real crazy wide with it. Catfishing is just something that I love to do at my spare time, and it changes the monotony up of if I'm striper fishing, 12 months a year. If I get those 15 to 20 cat trips a year, it really changes it up, and it kind of excites me a little bit. Like, man, I get to do something different today.
Yeah.
We get to do this or do that. But overall, I mean, I love to do it. And the thing with cats too is when you're dragging, you get a rod that goes down, you don't know if that cat is 5 pounds or 50 pounds until you get a hold of them and see what's going to happen. And then sometimes they'll still shock you. I've had some customers start reeling on a fish, and I've seen it too many times. I know better. But they'll say, Chip, man, this fish don't feel very big. And they've done heard me say that it's going to be a good one. And they're like, I don't think it's very good. And I'm watching the line, and I'm like, they're about to get a big shock because a lot of times you'll have two different types of cats, especially when you're chasing these big blues. So you'll have some fish will float to the top. And, they'll float off, they'll be 20, 30, 40 yards behind the boat, and they'll come to the top. And then they thrash around on the surface and as you're reeling them in. And it's still a good fight. But then you got usually these typical really big fish, 30+ pound fish, they will swim to the boat on you in a heartbeat. I mean, I'm watching the line, and it's just coming straight to the boat. And they're like, "Oh, Chip, it's not very big." I said, "Just keep reeling, and you'll see it. Like the line will stop right when it gets under the boat, and they keep reeling, and that rod just keeps going down farther and farther. And they're like, "I think I'm hung." I said, "No, you're not hung. It's have fun." And it's just a tug of war,
Yeah.
So I love it to see those fish when they swim to the boat. They just stay straight down. And it's just you're trying your best just to pull them up off the bottom. But yeah, all that stuff is just a blast. And like I said, it's just a big change in scenery for me. And I really, really typically that's what I do during the cool months. If I don't have a trip, I'm still on the water. I'm always on the water. I'm on the water probably. I hate to even say this because of that stuff that happened down in Florida, but I'm on the water about 300 days a year. Whether it's with a trip or without a trip, I'm still on the water. I go on vacation, I'm on the water. I mentioned earlier, if I go to Alaska every year. I love it up there. We go up there and we fish, and I come home and I fish. Anytime chance I get, I'm on the water and I'm fishing.
Right. That's awesome. Well, I have a couple of questions about. Thanks for getting into your setup with the Santee rig. And what pound test are you running on your main line on that rig? Is it the same as the striper setup with the 20 pound, or are you going higher?
I go much larger with the cat with the cat gear. Different rods. I use different rods, use different reels, different line. Typically, when you're fishing with these cats, you're putting your gear to the test, especially the lines and the leaders. You're dragging it on the bottom. I try to express that to my customers. They feel the line. I'm using, a 40-pound copolymer as a main line, and it feels like weed eater string. They're like, do we really need that? I'm like, I said, it's not about the fish. And I said, it's like we're dragging it through rocks and sticks and brush. And I said, you have to have something to take up with that abuse. And then like I said, so we're running a 40-pound copolymer main line, and I like the copolymer. I actually use a brand called Whisker Seeker, but Berkeley makes the Berkeley Chrome Spec or Pro Spec, Chrome Pro Spec or something like that. It's the same thing as that. So what the copolymer does is it's kind of like the happy medium in between braid and mono. So, you got all your stretch with mono, no stretch with braid, where your copolymer falls in between there. You have a little bit of stretch, but not so much as, if you get on you get hung on these brush piles, you get hung on these big cats, you don't want something that stretches a ton, but you do want some stretch, So the copolymer is a very good, something that's in between braid and mono. Now, as far as the leader goes with the cats, we're running a 50-pound leader. And again, it's not because of the fish, it's because of the torture you put it through. You catch some of these big blues, and I've had slime, 20 and 30 feet away from the hook up the main line, where they get up and they start rolling and twisting and turning, and sometimes they'll roll right up in the line.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have something that, can handle the abuse that, like I said, again, of dragging through the brush and dragging on the rocks, and so forth. But, so a 40-pound copolymer main line, 50-pound leader. And I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and jump into, so the hooks that I use on these stay-in-T rigs. I tie all my rigs. There's tons of places out there you can buy them these days, already pre-made up. I still tie all my stuff. I'm really kind of old-fashioned. But I use an 8-aught Whisker Seeker triple threat hook. I do use some 10-aught stuff on some really big baits, but typically I use an 8-aught. I'm not really into all this bling and flash. If you're a TikToker, there's like 4 or 5 guys out there that are just selling the mess out of these rigs, swearing they invented them or something. It's
Right.
just an old Santee rig. But I'm not all about the crazy rattles and the Zara spook flukes and spooks, and I've seen guys having flashing lights on them and spinners and just crazy stuff. So I use a hook, a peg float, and a slinky weight. That's it. I call it a slinky weight, drifting weight. I get mine off of Amazon. I think they're called rattling weights or something like that. I don't know. I like the way they look. They were green and look pretty cool. Pretty cool. So that's why I got them. It was nothing fancy about it. But yeah, like I said, I'm pretty straightforward with all that stuff.
That's great. Now, how do you choose a location to drag in? Obviously, you've been on Murray for 30 years, so you know areas. But how would you generally choose an area to say, hey, this would be a good spot to start dragging?
So typically in with Murray in that October through January stuff, I found that there's a large population of cats, say from the elbow up through both rivers, it just seems, it's not super deep to that area. The deepest area in that part I just mentioned is really going to be around the elbow, the mouth of Buffalo, Rocky Creek area. You're going to see some 60, 70 foot of water stuff there, but basically what tells me, hey, fish here, is I want to find bait somewhat close to the bottom. I just did a not really a podcast like this earlier today, but I do a monthly fishing report. And we talked a little bit about the bait and how much it really drives the fishery. But especially in the wintertime, you'll tend to have 2 types of bait. You have some bait that stays on the surface, and they're looking for that warmer water as far as the sun is beating down on the banks. And then you have this other population of bait that they just want consistency. The water temps on the surface, it can fluctuate 3 to 4 or 5 degrees in the wintertime. Whereas down deep, in that 40 to say 60 foot range, that water stays consistently the same temperature throughout the winter. And though that bait wants that consistency, you find the places where the bait is sitting on the bottom, those cats will not be far. The cats tend to be a bottom feeder, but not always. They will suspend, but typically you catch them on the bottom. So if you were a catfish, are you going to go and hang out on the bottom when when the bait you're eating is 40 feet above you, or are you going to go hang out where the bait is a foot above you? So I'll look and look, and over the years I've found in several areas that the bait just generally stays close to the bottom. So those are the areas I'm looking for. What I like to find is bait close to the bottom, but also close to a channel, which and then I can basically put my baits kind of on the channel edge. This gives me the ability to, if I feel like I want to go into the channel, I can kind of zigzag and drag my baits into the channel. If I want to get up on the flats, I can go up on the flats by zigzagging the other way. Or if I want to stay on the channel edge, and you get the best of both worlds, that gives you the ability to do that. So basically, long story short, there is I like to find bait on the bottom. Find bait on the bottom, close to a channel, and the cats will not be far away from it.
And that goes back to something else that you said, where when you were dragging, if you see a contour on the bottom, you just kind of turn your boat or position your lines so that they will go over that contour. So it looks like it sounds like you're using your graph quite a bit to your fish finder, to your sonar, to see what's going on down there. It sounds like that's a normal thing where you're looking for bait, or you're looking for contours, or the edges of the channels, things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a few little spots on Murray here. I kind of, they're not really honey holes, but I call them that. But I've pulled so many fish out of those little spots, and it's nothing more like, to the average person who just looks at a map, it wouldn't jump off the screen at you. But to me, like, it's literally, the channel edge is kind of just got a nice little bend to it. But right in the middle of that bend, there sets a couple contours that are just out of line. Or say the contour lines, they start stacking up really close to each other. When contour lines stack up really close to each other on a contour map, that means there's a ledge there. So a lot of times in blue cats, like sit on that ledge or right off the ledge, or like I said, just a little inset. When you're fishing these lakes, they're a lot different than the rivers. There's no current in these lakes, but I shouldn't say that. There's no visible current typically in these lakes, but there is current in the lakes that we don't feel or see. If you've ever got onto, I can take you all over this lake and show you a side scan, show you the ripples on the bottom of the lake. If you've ever been in a pond or a stream and you see the ripples in the sand from the current, those same ripples are in these lakes that I can show them to you. They're on the bottom, right in the channels. Which shows you that there's current that runs through there. So anytime there's a little bend in the channel or a little offset with the contour lines, that creates almost like a wall. Those cats a lot of times will sit right there in those bends or in those little holes to basically stay. Even though the current is so small, it's still current that they can sit. They don't have to sit in that current if they're on the bottom. They can kind of sit over on a ledge or sit behind almost like an eddy. If you were trout fishing, it's almost like an eddy. I can talk about this stuff all day long. It's always so much easier to show someone on a map what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I always tell people that's always the greatest things about my trips is I get out there and I get you on the boat and I start talking, and if you know what questions to ask, all of a sudden you'll open up like this treasure chest, and I'll start talking.
Yeah.
I'm in the back of my head, I'm like, you shouldn't be telling these people this stuff. This is stuff that you like. Well, you build a business on, but here you are just yapping away at it.
Well, it's because you love it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I tell people all the time, I have a large clientele base that come on my boat to learn, to pick my brain, because I'm not someone who shies away from, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you how to do this.
Right.
I was always told you catch more flies with sugar than you will vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to be super nice to people. You build value in yourself.
That's right.
If someone says, someone said, why do I want to spend $500 with you? And I'm sitting there saying, well, you can learn this, 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 and this. Next thing you know, it's not about them giving me $500. It's about them learning this, this, and this, and this
That's
for,
right.
paying this amount of money. So, all you people out there that want to be guides, I'll tell you this. I tell people this all the time. Catching fish as a guide is about 40% of your job. The other 60% is what gets the people on the boat and keeps them coming back on the boat.
Yeah.
It's not always about catching the fish. If I know a ton of great fishermen who are not great guides because the personality is not great and they can't keep the people coming back because they don't have value. They don't show value. They don't, but yeah, that's a whole nother podcast right there. How to be a guide without catching fish.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Just how to be a good guide. Obviously, you got to know how to catch fish and you got to be talented at that. But it's interesting. I interviewed not too long ago an Orvis endorsed fly fishing guide, and he was just so professional and just great. And to be an endorsed guide, or to be rather a successful guide, it sounds like you really have to really almost you have to know people, right? You have to be high people skills. And I was actually listening to the Orvis fly fishing podcast today, and they said the exact same thing, where it says being a guide, yes, is catching fish, but it's almost like you have to be a therapist in a sense, where you have to just be able to know people and know what their needs are, and be a teacher at heart. You have to be willing to teach and show people. If you're not willing to show someone the right way, then it's not the right job for you. So
it's exactly right. So I tell people, and I have people ask me all the time, what's it take to do this or do that? And I've also had buddies who have became guides and it didn't work out for them. They had to go back to their normal career. And I tell people all the time, so if you get into the fishing industry, well, you think you're in the fishing industry, you get into being a guide, and if you think you're in the fishing industry, you're already behind the eight ball, because you're not. I tell people all the time that, you're in the service industry, you're in the entertainment industry. You need to show someone a good time, not necessarily just catch fish, because, I tell people all the time, as much as, I love fishing. I don't want to talk about the economy and this and that. But if something were to go bad, the first person they're cutting out is me.
Yeah.
They're cutting out their entertainment. They can buy a lot of food for what it costs to get on my boat.
Right.
So it's not about that. So yeah, you absolutely have to take care of people. I tell people all the time, the first hour of my morning every day is watching the people, reading the people, and then also figuring out what the fish are doing. But first and foremost is I have to figure out who I have on my boat that morning.
That's right.
I get people who's never been on a boat. I get people who's never caught a fish, and then I get seasoned anglers who literally I can go up there and go to sleep and let them just use my boat, and they do just fine. So you have to read who you have on the boat that morning and make a day of it.
Right. That's so good. Such a good topic. And Chip, I get the impression we could probably keep on talking too, but what I wanted to do is give you an opportunity to plug your guide service. How can people connect with you?
So I'm mainly social media. I do have a website, but my guide service is Sea and Stripes, SEA-N-Stripes guide service. So Sea and Stripes guide service. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on the web, seeandstripesguideservice.com. The website, you don't have to put the dashes on either side of the end, but it's just straight. Typically, if you Google Lake Murray Striper Guide, I'm gonna be one of the top 5 right there that pop up. There's a bunch of us out there, but super easy to find. If you're on Facebook too, I run a group. It's called Lake Murray Fishing Reports. I'm the only admin on there, and it's got about 26,000 group members. That's a whole other job in itself, working that
I
that
bet.
page. But um, there's a lot of good people on there, and they all know me, and you know, I put a lot of my reports, a lot of my open dates go on there. Also, you can also just text me or call me. I'll show you my phone number here is 803-430-6007. And I always tell people, if you call, leave a message, because I usually, there's people out there, they've paid for their time with me, and if I'm on the boat, I won't answer.
Right.
If you text me, I may throw a text back to you, say, hey, look, I'll holler at you when I get off the water or something like that. But yeah, that's generally the way how you can get a hold of me, basically social media, or you can call, text, or look me up on the web and shoot me an email.
That's fabulous. Well, I'm hoping that a lot of people reach out to you. It sounds like you know how to catch stripers. And do you take people catfishing as well as charter, or is that just
Oh,
kind of?
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the stripers are my love, and it's a lot the catfish fishing. It seems like on Murray, it's just you got to find the right niche of group to go with you. Most of them want to go to Santee, where they see all these stories of these 100-pounders being caught and stuff like that, and they're like, oh, Murray don't have cats. Murray's got plenty of cats. But yeah, I definitely do plenty of catfish trips a year. Like I said, we do just about anything on the lake, but the striper and the catfish, and again, I tell people also, we talk about the Santee, people going to Santee, the Lake Murray shellcracker is something, it rivals right there with Santee. People go down there and they get on that cane pole up there in Low Falls and stuff like that, but you can come right here to Lake Murray and do it too.
Awesome. Well, Chip, thank you, sir, for your time. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and also your passion. I think all of that has come through on the call. I appreciate it. Glad to connect with you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, sir, and I'll be in touch with you here soon.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
I hope you enjoyed that call with Chip, who just told us so much about striper fishing and catfishing. I know one of the surprising things for me, I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised, but one of the helpful things to know is that you can get your bait down deep to those stripers without having to use downriggers. And so, if you have downriggers, no problem. Use them. Enjoy them. I know I do, but now I'm thinking, man, I didn't have to buy downriggers. I could have just used the larger egg sinker weights like Chip does to get the live bait down to those stripers. Another interesting thing too is the method of dragging for catfish. I think back on all of the many hours that I have sat on the lake catfishing, sitting in just single spots, right? Just sitting still, waiting and waiting and waiting for a fish to bite. And then when they do, it feels like it was worth it. We waited and we got the nice one. But sometimes I've sat and waited and never gotten a single bite. I like what Chip said about he doesn't like to just sit and wait for a fish to come to him. He'd rather go to the fish and drag the catfish baits across the bottom. And that's really interesting. I have never done that myself. Out of years and years and years of bottom fishing, I've never thought about dragging them like he does. And I know that's a popular method, and I know people have been doing that, but I've just never done it. I've never tried that new thing. That was one of the kind of themes that stood out to me as I was doing the call with Chip, and then just thinking about it after the call, was that this idea of trying something new, right? Constantly getting better, kind of always going to that next step and that next new thing, and not just assuming there aren't fish in the lake because the way you're doing it isn't working. I like how the call started where Chip was talking about his mom accidentally catching big brim, and then he and his dad were like, oh man, okay, that's how you do it, all because of an accident of sorts, because mom tried it on the other side of the boat. I think that also applies to this idea of the Christian walk, in that, sometimes we get stuck in seasons where it just seems dry. It doesn't seem like we're catching any fish. Much like the disciples, perhaps, after Jesus had been arrested and they're on the lake. That was the passage of Scripture I read at the beginning of the episode. They're on the lake and they're not catching anything. And Jesus says, try the other side of the boat. And that's when they catch all the fish. They tried something new, but they took the direction of Jesus to do it. And so I think for our Christian walks, I'd like to bring in that analogy. This idea of trying something new, trying perhaps the deeper side, or going deeper in our walk with the Lord and trying to understand what He wants us to do. I love what Scripture says in Philippians 1:6. Paul's writing to the church at Philippi, a church that he loves dearly, who was one of his very first churches that he started, and he's writing a letter to them because he has a relationship with them. And he says this about their partnership in the gospel and about their walk with the Lord. He says in Philippians 1:6 that being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on until completion, until the day of Christ Jesus. This good work in you, the church, or in you as a follower of Christ, that God wants to continue to do good works. He doesn't want you to just be still. He doesn't want you to just be stagnant, waiting for the one-off experience in your life to come, the one-off revelation. I think He wants us to constantly be moving our way through Scripture, to constantly be moving in action to draw closer to Him. And there's some things that I think we can strive for as believers, to be more like Jesus. This idea of becoming more and more like Jesus, to try new things, to throw the lines out into new waters, so to speak. Is if you haven't tried praying on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, Jesus modeled that for us. If we want to be more like Jesus, let's pray like Jesus did. The text tells us, Scripture tells us, that Jesus went off to pray, as was His custom. That was something He did on a regular basis, as He got aside and He prayed. I think if we're having a season of dryness in our faith, when we're not catching fish, we're not getting the results that we want, try praying on a regular basis, to getting aside. Make it your habit and your custom. That's one way that we can become more like Jesus and to try something new perhaps in our faith. The other one is just spending time in His Word. Jesus was saturated with the Word. He's literally the Word that became flesh. We learn about that in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14, and the Word became flesh. Jesus is the living Word. And so when He started His earthly ministry, He was led out into the desert by the Holy Spirit to be tempted. And while He was tempted, Jesus quoted Scripture. And so you could think, if there's a dry season in His life, if there was a time when it was not going well, so to speak, then you could say that was the season. And how did He get through that season? He quoted Scripture. He didn't get stuck. He stayed true through that season. And so I want to encourage you to do that. The other thing I want to point out about Jesus that I think is a great example for us who want to become more like Him is Jesus was not held back by cultural barriers. Jesus was not held back by the whole Jewish debate with the Samaritans. Jesus encountered a woman at the well. You can go read about that. And He spoke with her, and He interacted with her in a way that just broke so many cultural barriers. He also went to bat on behalf of a prostitute. Like Jesus, He healed the lepers, the people that were unclean. I think if we want to draw closer in our walk with Jesus, we need to become more like Him in that area. So that's just three ways that I think we can become more like Jesus and try something new in our life to yield a more fruitful catch in terms of our spiritual walks. Is pray like Jesus did on a regular basis. The second is be saturated in His Word, His Holy Scriptures, and allow God to speak to you through them. It's a supernatural, special revelation from God. The Holy Spirit, the God the Father, Jesus Christ, God communicates to us through his living and active word. He speaks to us through his word. So let's hear what he has to say for us today to navigate us through the seasons of life. And then lastly, let's not be held back by cultural barriers. Let's try something new in his name for his glory. Well, I hope this has been a helpful challenge, hopefully an encouragement for you as well to think about try something new in your walk with the Lord. Don't get stuck just waiting or get stuck doing the same old, same old. I know for those of us who have been fishing, at least I know for me, I can speak on my behalf. It's easy to constantly go back to the same spots and do the same things over and over again and get the same results. But if you want new results, if you want better results, if you want results that fill the nets to the point where they start to break, you got to try something new. And it starts with the word of the Lord. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Eternal Fishing Podcast. It's an honor to be a host of this show and to bring God's word, but also great fishing tips and techniques. And it's just really interesting to interview with fishing guides. I'd be honored if you would share the show with your friends, your family, people that you know, to follow the show, to like it on whatever platform that you're consuming it, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you may be hearing the show. I would be honored if you would like it and share the show. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, the Eternal Fishing Podcast. Search for the Eternal Fishing Podcast. Hey, until next time, tight lines.